Hey squad, how's it going? I had the chance to clear the raid a couple of times at this point on my Reaper and found some pretty great success on it, especially considering a few of the fights within the raid play pretty well into Reaper's strengths. So I wanted to put this guide together to help any struggling players because, well, the Reaper is a DPS that has a lot of room for error, but some awesome payoffs in terms of DPS. So first off, let's jump into the skill overview, and I'll promise to go over these very quickly because I think most people probably know what these do at this point. And first off, we have our basic filler spell, and this is Spirit Strike. This is just a 3-attack combo that at the final attack within this combo, you generate 1 incantation. The next spell is Moonsickle, and this is our basic edge spender, and it generates incantations for each part of the combo. You generate 1 incantation for the first 2 hits and 2 incantations on the 3rd hit. And next is our primary spender, and this is War Moon. This will consume up to 3 incantations to deal some pretty decent damage. Nothing too insane, but again, we could kind of spam it pretty quickly and get a lot of them off throughout a fight. And moving along, we have Heart Eater, and this just applies a dot, and if you see here, it stacks up to either 3 or 4 times depending on how many, or depending on what your Astral Blessings are. This deck just increased the damage a little bit, but there are some additional Astral Blessings that, depending on your stat count, increase your damage in a couple of ways, so we'll go over those in a moment. But moving on, we have the next one is Wheel of Frost, and this spell will just store a portion of your damage to a target, and it applies this debuff here, and once you activate Wheel of Frost, any of the stored damage will be consumed immediately to deal that set damage. And finally, well, I guess there's 2 more to go over. The first one is called Dustbringer, and this is our stealth mechanic. And while you're in stealth, you will deal increased damage, and you will also have an increased incantation generation. So if I just show that really quick, we'll just start off with 0 incantations here, and when I activate it, I'm just waiting to leave combat for a moment. Okay, so I'm out of combat. When I activate Dustbringer, you'll see here, my incantations regenerate pretty quickly, and that is another thing to note is this is normally a minute cooldown to activate Dustbringer, but if you use it out of combat, it's only 20 seconds. This is very important for our burst, and we'll touch on this a little bit more going forward. And the final spell I want to cover is our primary DPS cooldown, and that is Spectral Phantom. This spell is a little tricky to understand, but in very simple terms, it just takes a snapshot of your current cooldowns and your current resources, and when you reactivate the spell, it'll return you to the saved state. So basically all your cooldowns will recover and your incantations will regenerate as well. So I will showcase that very quickly here because, again, it is pretty important to our burst. So if you look at this, our current state here, I'll activate Spectral Phantom right now. You can see that my Dustbringer is still available. I have full incantations and full edge. So if I activate Dustbringer now, and then I go into combat here, and I just start spamming all of my resources, and I reactivate Spectral Phantom right now, Dustbringer resets the cooldown, and I now have full incantations and full edge. So it basically allows us to do a whole another set of burst in our opening and in the middle of a fight or whatever. So it's a very, very powerful cooldown and is what really allows the Reapers to pop off in their opening burst. So next up, I want to look a bit at the Astral Blessings available to the Assassin Reapers. And there are there are 3 builds. I think there's a build that's almost entirely dedicated to War Moon. There's one that kind of revolves around our damage over time effects. And finally, there's one that is kind of a hybrid between the two. And personally, I found the most success with the War Moon and the hybrid build, and those are the two builds that I will quickly go over here. In terms of the hybrid, only one Astral Blessing really changes, but yeah, let's start looking over these. The first one you want to take for the War Moon build is called 1,000 Broken Hearts, and this basically enables Heart Eater to stack up for basically Heart Eater stacks 3 normally, but with this Astral Blessing it can stack up to 4 times, and it just increases the damage dealt by Heart Eater basically. But it plays into our next Astral Blessing, which is called Resting State, and this Astral Blessing enables War Moon to reset the cooldown, or sorry, the current duration of Heart Eater on the target, and it also increases War Moon damage by, well, a scaling amount depending on the total stacks of Heart Eater that are applied to the target. So any targets with 4 stacks of Heart Eater will be taking 42% increased damage from War Moon. So this next Astral Blessing, the third row, this is kind of where the hybrid versus the straight War Moon build comes into play. The Astral Blessing that determines your War Moon build is called Rime Month Lamp, and this changes Wheel of Frost to have a 30-second cooldown, and when you activate it, it will give you a 15-second buff that increases your War Moon and Heart Eater damage by a pretty large amount, and after those 15 seconds are up, you will enter a debuff state for 6 seconds, which decreases War Moon damage by, well, 45%, so pretty noticeable. As for the hybrid kind of build, you would be taking Knights and Lantern, and this just changes this just changes your Wheel of Frost, the damage conversion rate to increase by 50%. So any damage you're dealing, it just is storing an additional amount. So when you activate Wheel of Frost, it basically pops for more damage. So the last 2 Astral Blessings are Maggot Awakening, and this is basically anytime Heart Eater deals damage to a target, or Moth Poison, but Moth Poison is the damage over time effect, so it's not really relevant to this build. If Heart Eater deals damage, there is a 30% chance that it regenerates 20 points of edge and heals you for a little bit. It's mostly the edge that we care about, but the extra sustain is pretty decent, especially if you're fighting a lot of mobs at once. For the final Astral Blessing, we have Silent Summoning, and this extends the duration of Dustbringer by 7 seconds, and while you're in the Dustbringer state, if you have 4 Heart Eater stacks applied to any target, your damage increases by 115% in the Dustbringer state, so it just gives you insane burst when you're in your Dustbringer, and also it increases the rate at which you generate incantations by an additional 50%. So you get a ton of resources, your burst is through the roof, and overall this just makes the Reaper really really devastating. Next, I want to look at some of the glyphs. These aren't really absolutely important besides one of them, but want to cover them anyhow, and there are 4 primary ones you want to take. The first one, and the most important, is called Difficult Journey, and this states that when you're in your Dustbringer state, War Moon, instead of consuming up to 3 incantations, it will now consume up to 5, and the damage scales insanely well. And then to add that into Dustbringer already increasing our damage by a lot, this again just makes for insane burst. The next one is Voodoo, and this just gives us some passive incantation generation. It's only 1 incantation every 12 seconds, but it does scale with haste. It's not anything too outstanding, but still it's passive regeneration, so why not? Finally, we have Antidote, and this just increases our War Moon damage by a flat rate, but if War Moon happens to miss a target, if like a boss jumps out of your range or something like that, you will refund 2 of your incantations spent on that War Moon. So kind of another form of resource generation, I guess, but I think the passive 5% damage is what we're mostly looking at. Oh, I forgot this last one. This really lets Reaper shine in execute phases. and that is Return Soul. This basically states that any targets with 30% HP or less will be taking 12% increased damage from yourself. So this applies to all of your damage effects. So once 30%, that 30% threshold is hit for the boss, you will start to deal absurd damage. So next up, I want to look at the stat priority for Reapers, and the main stat you want to be fishing for is Mastery, and this just increases the damage conversion of Light of Silence or Wheel of Frost, and also increases War Moon and Moth Poison damage. It basically is a catch-all. It increases the primary sources of damage for our kit, and it's, as far as I know, I don't think there's any kind of breakpoint when we want to go for this. Just kind of stacking as much mastery as far as I'm aware. And yeah, it's just a very powerful stat. Next we have Physical Strength, and this just increases all of our damage by a flat rate. It doesn't scale as well as Mastery, but it still affects every portion of our kit, so it's still an important stat to go for. Next we have Perception, and this is just so every kind of mob has a chance to deflect some of your damage, and Perception is a way to kind of ignore that damage reduction, I guess, for any of your mobs that you're facing. And yeah, it's just a way to make sure you're dealing the damage that you're supposed to be. There's no sort of reduction to your damage as it's going out or anything like that. Next up is Crit that we want to go for, and pretty self-explanatory, just makes your attacks deal more damage. And finally we have Haste. Haste is, well, doesn't really do anything for our class. It just kind of reduces the cooldown a little bit and increases edge regeneration. And I guess it reduces War Moon cast time, but I don't think that's really that important, especially if we're running Maggot's Awakening. Our edge generation is going to be, it's going to be enough to let us deal our damage. And one last thing I want to kind of call out here is the Soul Force you want to be going for. The primary one you want to level up is called, what is it? Break Formation. This just increases the damage dealt while a target is above 90% HP, and this just kind of gives the Reaper already has insane opening burst, but this just increases it exponentially. So make sure you're leveling up Break Formation first, and the second one that you want to go for, I think it's called Hard Ice. Yeah. Hard Ice is just some passive damage. It's not really anything too crazy. So yeah, Break Formation is probably the one you want to go for first. Next, I want to cover the burst rotation that you'll be using as an assassin. The first rotation I want to cover is your opening burst, or basically your full cooldown rotation. This is what you'll use at the start of a fight, and when you're in the middle of the fight and Spectral Phantom is coming off cooldown. And to start this burst rotation, you want to enter combat in stealth already. And from here, a couple seconds before I pull, I will use Spectral Phantom. Next, I will use Heart Eater, and then Wheel of Frost. And now I will start spamming War Moons, specifically with 5 incantations, and just kind of keep going through this. And as you see, Dustbringer is ready to go, so I'll use my next Dustbringer, Spectral Phantom, and War Moon, or Wheel of Frost. And I'm just trying to make sure my edge doesn't overcap, and same with my incantations, but I'm also trying to get 5 incantations off with every single War Moon. And yeah, that's kind of my opening burst, but right now I'm just waiting for Wheel of Frost to come off cooldown again, because you can see I have Dustbringer available here, and I'm stacking up my incantations. I'll pop Wheel of Frost now, Dustbringer, and it kind of goes back into this little mini burst phase. Here I am just following that same kind of rule set where I'm just trying to maintain around 5 5 incantations without overcapping any incantation or edge. Just managing your resources, basically. So for the other rotation I want to cover is the mini burst phase. This is going to be when you don't have Spectral Phantom available and is usually in the middle of a fight, when you have Wheel of Frost and Dustbringer available. So let's assume that in this case, again, I'm in the middle of a fight and I don't have Spectral Phantom. What I want to do is I'll have Heart Eater available, I'll have max incantations, and then I just use Wheel of Frost and Dustbringer and go into this little window where, you guessed it, I'm trying to maintain my incantations without overcapping any of my resources. And I want to make sure I'm using as many 5 incantation war moons as possible. And yeah, it's just like a little burst window every 30 seconds with your Wheel of Frost. And as you see here, Wheel of Frost is coming off cooldown right now, and we enter a little mini burst phase here again. And when you don't have Dustbringer available, you'll just be using 3 incantation war moons, and that's fine. You just want to get as many of these as possible off in this little window before you get the debuff. Okay, so for a couple of tips before I wrap up here, when you're in your burst rotation, you want to try getting off as many 5 incantation war moons as possible. Obviously, I've tried to reiterate that as much as possible. This usually equates to getting between 7 and 8 war moons during your burst window. This might depend a little bit on RNG with your Maggot Awakening. It also might have to deal a little bit with your Moonsickle. There's like a little chance for it to generate extra incantations. So little RNG might be involved, but it should on average be between 7 and 8 7 and 8 war moons using 5 incantations. Next, when your Dustbringer and Rime Month, the Wheel of Frost buff is about to fall off, you want to use your War Moon regardless of how many incantations you have. So I guess this is the one exception to the rule. Let's say I'm about to run out of my Rime Month right now. Even though I only have like 4 incantations, I still want to use War Moon because it's still getting a lot of benefit from both Dustbringer and Rime Month. So yeah, you just want to consume any remaining resources you have before your burst window ends. Next, prior to your burst windows, you want to stockpile all of your incantations and edge prior to entering that burst phase. This will make reaching that 7 or 8 War Moon threshold that much easier. And my final tip is, if there are multiple targets within a fight, it's worthwhile to maintain Heart Eater on multiple targets, even if they are spread out. This grants extra resource generation throughout the fight thanks to Maggot's Awakening and that extra edge generation, and it just lets you get that many more war moons off throughout the fight. That sums up my Assassin Reaper guide, and if you guys found this helpful and you think I've earned it, a like and subscribe would be greatly appreciated. There will be more Swords of Legends content in the future, and I hope everyone has been enjoying the game as much as I have. But I'm GooberTroy from Squad Up Games saying thank you for watching, and remember to squad up and have fun.